Welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles, Cleft Mom Diaries, and Support Podcast. I am Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other Cleft moms and advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the follow or subscribe button. Join us on this journey. Thank you so much for subscribing. And we have so much in store for, I can't believe it is 2025. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to share the information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are sharing our own personal experiences. Before I introduce our next guest, I'm just so excited to announce that we have merch available. The Our Forever Smiles merch is available on our website, ourforeversmiles.com. Every item that you purchase fuels more inspiring conversations and just helps us grow the show. I am so excited to have our guest here today. I've followed her online for a while. Her name is Kimberly, and she is a school psychologist by trade, but being a mom is her favorite job. She's been a part of the Cleft community since 1998, when her brother Benjamin was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And she's watched her younger brother Sebastian navigate his own cleft journey, and has since becoming a cleft mama to 3 beautiful babies. Van der Woude syndrome runs in her immediate family, a genetic condition that often results in cleft. The best thing that she has ever did was become a mom, and being a mom 3 times, Cleft Mama is a unique journey filled with resilience, passion, and an overwhelming amount of love. She is overwhelmingly obsessed with her children, which she posts them online also, so I'm like a little obsessed too, and proud of their unique journeys. And she plans to spend the rest of her days loving and advocating for them so that they can live a full, joyful, and confident lives. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, thank you.
So I just told Kimberly that before we started recording, I actually intentionally try to avoid her stories so that I can record this episode and learn about her experience with her, because I have been so curious. I think when Lane was just born, how old is Lane now?
She's 6 weeks yesterday. I feel like that the time has gone by so fast, but she's still very little.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm like thinking back when Giselle was 6 weeks, and just so just like a little pea, you know?
Yeah. Like everything that they do is like the first time that they do it. That's what I love about the newborn stage, is like everything, just their facial expressions, or when they get a new little bit of hair, or everything is brand new. It's so exciting.
Yeah, I think what has made me particularly interested in your journey, obviously because you have 3 children that were born with a cleft, but one of the things that you shared more recently was before Lane was born, at your ultrasound and getting that diagnosis for Lane, and you had a very vulnerable post that was sharing, like, I wish that our story was different, but like the sentiment that you're also prepared for this. And what is that feeling like, getting that? Like, how did you go into that day, going into your anatomy scan?
Disclaimer, I will probably cry at least at one point, or if not multiple times, during just talking about my kids, mainly just because I love them so much. And it's just, the cleft journey in itself is emotion filled, positive, grief, happy, sad. There's so many big emotions in all of that. But so a little bit of background. I myself have what's called Van der Rohe syndrome, and it is a genetic mutation in the IRF6 gene. And that gene specifically, if there's a mutation there, it is most commonly associated with clefts. So obviously when I was born, I'm the eldest of 3. I have 2 younger brothers. When I was born, everything was fine. I was a preemie baby, but I obviously wasn't not myself born with a cleft or any big genetic abnormalities that my mom was concerned with. But when my first brother, Benjamin, was born, and he was born with a bilateral cleft lip and cleft palate, my parents at that time did genetic testing for my brother, and at that time they included me as well. And that's when they had learned about van der Rohe syndrome. But back then, there was very little. We have come a very long way in the last 25 years in the cleft community in general. But back then, there was very little information about clefts and specifically van der Rohe syndrome. So I had always known growing up myself that I had that syndrome, but didn't really exactly know what it meant. We didn't talk about it a whole lot as a family per se, but I knew in the back of my mind, even as a really young girl, it meant that clefts were in my genetic line, and there was always a possibility that I would have a child with a cleft. Like there was always just a chance because of that syndrome. But it wasn't until I actually had my first son, Logan, that I was like, oh, like it's not just like a thought, like this is real. And so that was that in itself was a challenge, because it was like I walked into Logan's ultrasound thinking, okay, there's a chance that he could have a cleft, but there's no way it's actually going to happen to me, you know? But you also, you're like, no, there's just no way. So when I found out about his cleft, I was like, I feel like all of the wind was knocked out of me, because I wasn't expecting it, but I also was. It was a very like surreal feeling. And subsequently, with my other kids, it's always been the same feeling, although it hasn't lessened a little bit, as it hasn't been quite as big of a gut punch. Like when I found out I was pregnant with Leah and walking into that growth scan, it was like, okay, like this could happen again. There's a very real chance, but also like, surely it's not going to happen to me again for a second time. A little bit of, yes, I know, but also there's no way. And so when I found out with her, I grieved less than with Logan, but it was a different kind of grief. It was almost worse because I knew what the cleft journey was going to be like. I knew it was going to be really hard. So it was like, oh, we cannot go through this again. Because you really know how it's not just a one quick fix. We were still actively up, like a month before Leah was born, Logan had another cleft related surgery. Like we're still actively like in his journey. And now we were like going to add another one. And I remember when after Logan, we met with the genetics team through Stanford, and they had explained van der Rohe syndrome a little bit more, and like what the chances were of our kids having clefts and what that looked like. And the way that the syndrome works is really interesting. I don't have a cleft, but I am a carrier of the gene. It is a dominant gene, so only one parent, I or my husband, has to have the gene to pass it on to our children. So the way that they have explained it to me is all of my children will get that syndrome because I'm a carrier. They're going to also be carriers. But whether or not that's going to result in a cleft, they still don't have enough research to say one way or the other. Like, for instance, they say it's between a 3 to 98% chance, which makes no sense. Like, that's a really big span. So really, they just call it 50-50. They say there's a 50-50 shot that it will result in a cleft. Because there's definitely a chance. It doesn't have to be that way, but so far we're 3 for 3.
Yeah. Do you like go in I don't know if you're like in the Cleft Mom support groups or anything, but you know how people will comment in there and they're like, we're preparing for another child. And of course, there's so many moms that go in there like, the chances are so low. And they share all of these things. And I guess just in thinking about that, does that kind of make you want to share like, oh, I have this, and while they say that there's not really that big of a chance to have another child with a cleft, if this happened to me, is there like a pool to share that?
Yes, and I have at times chimed in on that conversation. I think like the cleft world is so big, right? And I feel like me and my family were a very small subset of that cleft community, because our journey is so unique because it is genetic. Versus I think the vast majority of people that are walking their own cleft journeys, their teams haven't identified any kind of genetic condition associated with their clefts. And so it's usually just an isolated case where it just happens by chance. And there's no reason why. And so I think that's the majority of people that are walking through cleft journeys is it just happens. That's just the journey that they were given. But I think for us, because it's genetically associated, I feel like I wouldn't say an outsider, but I would say we're definitely different than most people that are walking the cleft journeys, if that makes sense. So I feel like sometimes I can engage in those conversations, but there's so few people that are really relating to that chance or that potential.
Yeah. Also the other thing that I find interesting is how many people don't get genetic testing. Like,
Yeah.
so my daughter Giselle, she's cleft palate affected only. And so because of that, they noticed that she had a smaller jaw when she was younger. So they wanted to do genetic testing for that fact. And I'm really grateful for that because I think the not knowing is something that would bother me, like that I would stew on. And so I'm grateful for that. But then when I talk to other moms and other like parents and stuff, they're like, oh no, we didn't do it's interesting how like people respond to this too. Like, we didn't do genetic testing because it wouldn't have made a difference. And I'm like, yeah, we know that of course you're going to love your child just as they are, but aren't you curious of if something is going to show up later on in life? Or as you have shared, right, you're not a cleft affected individual, but you carry this gene that could potentially be passed on to your children, and it did. And wouldn't you want to have a better understanding of that, because it can like help you navigate in your future generations? But speaking of that, upon Logan's diagnosis, how did your mom respond to this? And is she someone that you've been able to lean on because she's gone through this experience? But I imagine it was way different, right? Is that like, how did she respond to knowing that about Logan's diagnosis?
I called her like in the parking lot, but it was hard because I was just crying nonstop. And I almost didn't even want to call her because I wasn't at the point where I like could answer questions, or I knew
Okay.
that it was going to be emotional for her to hear that. And I was like, I can't also take on your emotional burden.
Okay.
I'm barely like feeling it myself. So I was hesitant to even tell her. I don't even remember if the words came out of my mouth or if they came out of my husband's, but I know that initially she was sad. She was sad and she had the same amount of grief. Um, but in the same breath, it was like, but we can do this. Like, we've done this before. And he's going to be beautiful and it's going to be okay and it's going to be hard, but you're not alone. It's the way that the conversation has always gone. And in the beginning, I would just ask her a lot of questions, like, what was it like for Benjamin? Or what was it like for Sebastian? Or what did you do? So it was nice for her to be like a live source. And I think like my brothers have always had clefts, and I watched my brother Sebastian walk through his cleft journey with my mom, but I didn't get it until I was in it. Like it didn't register to me that a huge, large majority of her parenting journey has been revolved around my brother's cleft. Like being an older sister, I saw that, but I didn't feel that in the same way and so that opened up a lot of like respect and appreciation and understanding for her too, because being a sister and being a mother walking through those journeys is very different.
Yeah. Sorry. I will give a disclaimer too. Sometimes I cry as well. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think when you think about when you're able to experience something that someone else experienced, like it's different watching it than actually like experiencing it yourself. And I enjoy sharing that, like, and I know that feeling that you feel, because even sometimes when I'm having these conversations with people, I'm like, wow, I can literally take myself back to like my body has a physical response to what I experienced and the amount of stress I was in, and just obviously that first year that first year is so hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, like for you to have this diagnosis, and it's now I'm actually seeing what you experienced as a mom. But I think that's a beautiful thing to also have this firsthand like resource too, right? Because a lot of us are I actually didn't discover like the groups and stuff until Giselle was probably about 3 months, like 3 or 4 months. And I was like, what? This is happening to all these people? There's no way. It's 20,000 people in a group. There's just no way. The way that what I had known about clefts and just how the people at the hospital, I felt were so misinformed about so many things. You would think that, oh, you're like a huge anomaly. And so it is like a weird feeling to feel like you're the only one. Now, was this something like before you started family planning, was that something that you spoke to your husband about? Or was that like completely off your radar in terms of what your family structure would look like?
My husband and I have this March will be 15 years since we started dating. So I will have officially been with him 50% of my lifetime this March. So we've known each other for a long time. We've only been married for 5 years now, but we've been in each other's lives for a long time. And so he has essentially seen my brother, Sebastian, grow up too. And has like always had his foot in like the cleft world, just watching my brother go through surgeries or my mom and brother going up for cleft appointments or things. It's something that he was always aware of while we were dating. But obviously we were really young when we started dating. So my husband always knew that my family has a history of cleft. I have two brothers with clefts. And so I think in his mind, he always knew that was a possibility. It was something that we had talked about briefly, like this is a possibility. And what if this happens? And my husband is one of one, amazing, beyond amazing. But he has always just had it's okay. Your brother is great and he's fine. And if that's the journey that we're given, like it's okay. And we're going to walk through it. And he has always been, especially in regards to like the cleft journey, so cool, calm, and collected, where I'm a little bit more about this and anxious and stressed and sad and crying. And so so Logan was born in 2020. So when we had his anatomy scan, we were in the thick of COVID. My husband wasn't allowed in the ultrasound with us. And so I had to find out that news by myself. And I remember after I saw Logan's cleft on the ultrasound before the tech even said anything. Like I could just see it. And I was like, I know what that is. And I know what they're going to tell me right now. And so when they gave me the news and then the doctor comes in and like confirms, it's like my ear started ringing and the world started spinning and I just saw black and like you don't even know what's going on anymore. At least for me, I just feel like I just blacked out. I didn't. I was still there, but that just anything that the doctor was saying was just like words. They didn't even make sense to me. And so I left that room as fast as I could and I just booked it straight to the car because I was like, I'm just going to cry and I need to hold it in. And I remember that feeling like the longest walk ever from the room to my husband was because I was just trying to like keep in the tears. And as soon as I got to the car, I just started crying. And for a long time, I couldn't even tell my husband like the words, I couldn't even say it because I just had felt so. And I didn't feel scared. I just felt sad because even though like clefts weren't scary to me, I have been in that world my whole life, really. I was not scared. I just knew that how hard it had been for my brother. In his life, that I was like, I did not want my son to have to go through that. I did not want him to have to struggle. I knew it was going to be hard for me and it was going to be hard for my husband, and I didn't care. Like, we would be fine. Like, we would walk to the ends of the earth for him. We were going to be okay. I just didn't want that for Logan. So that was the hardest thing. Like, I just couldn't physically say the words like, he has a cleft. It took me a little while. And I just remember feeling really devastated. And my husband was just like, okay, it's fine. And I was like, it was like, what? Like, just his reaction was so relaxed and was just so, he's going to be perfect and we're going to love him and he's going to be amazing and we're going to get through it. That was like everything that I needed and more in that moment. He was just like, great. I think one of his first things that he said was like, I'm just so excited to meet him. Of that, okay, like we can do this. And we did, and we have, and we've been doing it ever since. And I think what a huge difference is just having a partner to walk through this with that has that kind of attitude. And not to say that it didn't affect my husband or it wasn't hard for him. Like we then like tag teamed times of grief because it was hard for me at first and he was very like, it'll be okay. And then there came a point where I really like dove into the Cleft community and I was just like on the Facebook, groups, like scrolling through, like learning as much as I could, reading as much as I could, trying to figure out what our life would look like. And then he went through his moments of grief too, where he was really sad and we just tag teamed that, but we have always done it together and that has made a huge difference for us.
Yeah, no, I think in you just going back to just thinking about your own brother's journey and you knowing and you being so like intimately close with that, like you've seen it firsthand. I was actually actually wrote that down as a talking point between us today because you posted a video of Logan during the Christmas concert or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just like watching it and I like Giselle does these things where you're just watching them and you're just like so fascinated by them and you like I really hope that nobody ever like steals that light that they have in them. And then I'm like watching this video that you posted. He's literally the only one that like knows the moves and is doing them. And I'm like, and the whole guitar thing that they did. What a beautiful child, and he has such a light about him. And I think that genuinely comes from your parents, right? You all instill that fun in him, right? And that confidence in him. And I'm sure that this is a part of your daily struggle that you've shared, that you don't want that to ever go away, or you don't ever want him to face bullying or just people making comments, because that can really destroy someone's confidence in a lot of ways. And so that I know that can be really, really hard.
Yeah, I would say my husband and I always laugh about this. I would say our one greatest parenting, I don't even know if it's a strength, but the one thing that we do really well is we ride hard for whatever he likes. So when he has an infant, like we're like, you like that? Okay, let's go do that. Like, yeah, really into Peter Pan for a while. And so you like Peter Pan? Here's a Peter Pan costume. Here's a Peter Pan book. And now we're going to go to Disneyland and we're going to stay in Fantasyland until we find Peter Pan himself. Or then during Christmas time, he really likes Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Oh, you like Rudolph? Okay, here's this. And our house is full. Here's a Rudolph inflatable that we keep on 24/7 because that's what you like. Or last week, literally, we watched on Netflix, he loves ocean life, and we watched the Oceans documentary series on Netflix, and it had elephant seals on there, and I'm like, oh, you like elephant seals now? We're gonna go to the elephant seals. And that like drove to go and see them. I think they're only little for so long, and I'm like, if your favorite thing in the whole world is a pumpkin, like I'm gonna ride so hard for the pumpkin life because that brings you joy, and they're not going to be filled with just like the pure innocent joy of thinking that a vegetable is the coolest thing in the entire world. And so while you do, like, we're just going to like lean into that hard because it makes you happy. And I know there will be a day where some of that, like, that light is robbed from him. Because too, like, he's a very sensitive kid, and all of our kids' journeys at some point. But we're just gonna like lean into it. I think what has helped tremendously is having more than one child with the cleft. And especially, and I'm really at this point just so beyond grateful for it. Because after we had Leah, Logan was able to witness his own cleft journey through her. Like, we were able to, like, this is a cleft, and this is a cleft lip, and this is a cleft palate, and this is the NAM. And then he watches me make the NAM tapes. Even now he's a little bit older, so when we do that stuff with Lane, he's, hold on, let me go get her NAM. Or, you know, like, it's just when we got her Lane's first ultrasound pictures, it's just that long strip. He wanted to take that to school and show his teachers. And so the first thing he did was like, look, this is my baby sister. She's going to have a cleft lip and she's beautiful. And like, he just went around to everybody and was just like, she has a cleft lip and she's beautiful. And it's just, I feel like he gets to experience his own cleft journey through them, or see it through them. Or like, yesterday we changed Lane's NAM tape. So the tapes were off of her face, and Leah, who's only one, would go up and she's like, where's her tapes? Like, they're just so invested in it. It's just, it's our daily life. But I do think that it's healing for them. Logan's missing a tooth where his cleft is, and he's so the other day he looked in the mirror, he's like, Mom, where's my tooth? And it was like, he's like, oh, that's right. It just fell out. It just fell out when I fell down. And I was like, no, that's not what happened. And we got to explain it a little bit more. And then last week he looked in the mirror while we were brushing his teeth, and he's like, Mom, what is that on my face? He was like, what do you mean? He's like, right there. And I was like, that's where your cleft was. He was pointing to his scar. And he sat there in the mirror and just looked at his face for 10 minutes. He's okay. And then just went about his day. But he's starting to like notice more, see more, experience more. And I think we have always just chosen to be super open and about the hard, honest about the easy things, the good things, the bad things. Like, before we go to the pediatrician, like, I tell him, you're going to get a shot today. Because I don't want him to show up to an office and then be so blindsided and be terrified. But we're very like, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. This is when it's going to happen. And so we do that a lot with his cleft journey too, or even with Leah and Lane's. Last summer, my brother came to visit us and he spent some time with us. And it was actually perfect because it was around a time that we needed to go to a cleft appointment for Logan. And so he came with us, and actually my brother's cleft team is where we go now for the kids. And so walking back into the same building was the same building that my brother used to walk into when he was a young kid. And so I think it was actually really interesting to hear his reaction afterwards, because it was a particularly hard appointment. We had to get Logan scoped for his surgery because he's struggling with speech. And so they needed to put a nasal scope into his nose and have him say certain sounds to see how his palate was closing and if he was getting enough closure in his palate to be able to, whether or not he needed to have a surgery. And so it was a hard appointment to go through. We had to hold him down to get the scope. It was challenging. And as soon as we were done, I just walked out the clinic and I just lost it. I was just bawling because it was hard. And that was actually the first time that my brother noticed, like, he's like, oh, I didn't realize how hard the cleft journey was for moms. And for our mom in particular, I never thought that it would have been hard for her. And I'm like, it's gut-wrenching to be a mom on the other side of it. And it was just really interesting. He was like, I had no idea that it was harder than just himself.
Yeah. That's that's a great perspective. I think in thinking about, like, you mentioned Leah as well, and just her or Logan being able to see Leah's journey, how have they been different? Like, how did you go into Leah's diagnosis? Obviously, you're still crushed, but did you feel like, okay, I know this? And how have they been different?
Yeah, I feel like after the initial grief, it was like, okay, we got this. We know what to do. We know where to go. We know who our people are. Like, it will be okay. And so the nicest thing is that we know the team, and the team knows us because our Cleft team is our ride or dies. We spend a lot, especially the first 4 months, we spend so much time, I feel, with them. because we choose to do the NAM. We're in the office every week. So we see them a lot, sometimes more than we see our families.
Mm.
And so it almost feels like a it does feel like a family for us. Like we go up there and it's okay, here's our other family. So their journeys have been different, but it has been so nice and so enlightening because of everything we learned through Logan's journey. We knew what to look out for in Leah's. And same thing now with Lane. We're like, okay, this could possibly be an issue, or this could, or maybe it's ears, or maybe it's this, or that we've just learned a lot throughout all of the journeys that I feel like each subsequent one is a lot easier because there's less question marks. Logan has had 5 surgeries so far. Leah has had 2 and Lane has had 0. But knowing what we know from Logan, I think it really helps shape us and advocate too for, no, this is what I think this is, or this is what they need, or pushing for a bit more.
Do they have different types of clefts? I feel like I saw that Lane is not palate affected, or did I read that wrong?
No, that's correct. Logan is a left unilateral cleft lip and bilateral cleft palate. Leah is the exact same, left unilateral cleft lip and bilateral cleft palate. And Lane is a bilateral cleft lip.
That's so interesting. Now, is that how Woude works? It could, like, it could be range?
It could be any combination of anything. So in addition to cleft lip and cleft palate, there are a couple of other like syndromatic characteristics of the syndrome. Like, for instance, syndactyly is another common occurrence with the syndrome, and that's just webbing of the toes, webbing of the 2 middle toes. They just stick together a little bit more. They're not fully separated. So Leah has that. I also have that. That's actually one of my links to the syndrome, is that's what I got. I got the syndactyly. The most common one is bottom lip pits. Our lip pits are salivary glands that kind of appear in the lip. And that is upon birth. If children have lip pits, it's almost always linked to Van der Rohe syndrome. That is the hallmark landmark. So I have that. Both of my brothers, all 3 of my kids, that's like the classic marker of Van der Rohe syndrome. And another interesting one is missing adult teeth. So I actually still have a baby tooth in my mouth. Just never had an adult tooth under. So that's something we don't know about if our kids have that yet. But that's another weird marker of the syndrome.
Yeah, so I had thought about this, right? Giselle was born with she is not lip affected, she's cleft palate affected only. But her sister, who's 7, she has a different mother, has lip pits. And yeah. And so, of course, when Giselle was born, in all of my research, one of the things that I've searched, and they actually initially thought that Giselle had PRS because of her jaw. But it turns out she didn't. All of her genetic stuff and everything came back as isolated, and she didn't need any distractions or oxygen or anything like that. We just left it at that. But then I noticed that her sister has lip pits, and they're very pronounced. And of course, I don't want to my daughter has a cleft palate. Like, your daughter, you should probably look into this. Like, I don't want to be that step parent. But I actually did mention it to her. Hey, I took a look at this, but I think you have actually, with you saying this, I'm going to look further into it, because I feel like that's important, just as you shared, that each of our daughters has the potential to carry this gene. And
just going back to what you had mentioned earlier is why do genetic testing? You're going to love them the same. It's not going to change anything. Back to that point, even though all of my kids have the syndrome, we still opt to do genetic testing. That way they have that physically. So when they, especially not just our daughters, Logan too, when they move into family planning, they have that. This is what I have. It's on paper. This is what I need, or these are the conversations that I want to have in regards to family planning. If I would have been an only child, we would have never known just based on my lip hits and the syndactyly that I have a genetic condition or mutation at all. But obviously that genetic testing like opened up a lot. So I don't think knowing answers on a genetic testing or screener is definitely not going to change how you feel about your child. You're gonna love them no matter what, but we have chosen to do it too because we are in a place where our insurance will pay for it, our insurance will cover it. And so it's one less thing that they have to think about down the road. We just feel like we have the ability to do it. So we're gonna do it. So it's just one less burden for them eventually.
Yeah.
Down the road. It's one less thing. It's something else that we can do for them now that will maybe ease things a little bit for them in the future, just to have that information about them, their own personal health.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the more information that you have, the more, you can help, the more prepared you are.
I do think there is like an emotional aspect of like physically seeing too on paper, like this is what I'll do.
That's a great point.
Even though obviously my children have clefts, every time I see their like my chart printout or with their diagnoses on it and it says like cleft lip palate, the nasal deformity, like you just see like the list of all the things that are wrong. Yeah, sure, I know that, but seeing it on paper, like holding that paper in my hands with this list of medical things that are wrong with them, that's hard to see, even though I know. Or even like both Logan and Leah, they both have speech IEPs. So they get speech services in a school setting. They also get private speech services. And every time I sit down for those IEPs, like they obviously have them because we're getting support with their speech. But every time I see the list of concerns or I see the goals, I feel like you're saying the things that are wrong with my child. I know that he struggles with this sound, or I know she needs help with this, but physically seeing it written on paper kind of always takes your breath away a little, at least for me, even though I know. Seeing it just makes it more concrete.
No, I can empathize with that. Yeah, I do. I do understand that. I think I was like, I always tell people actually, that was probably the hardest appointment that I had gone to was the genetics appointment because it was like, I don't know, I didn't know what was going to come of it. But then you like see, and also I had been through like I was in the NICU and then they're like, okay, I think she was probably like 4 or 6 weeks or something like that. They're like, okay, take her to do this like genetic testing. And I'm like, she's been poked, she's been hooked up to an IV. And I'm like, I don't want another person to, and then to like now another needle. And I think it was just so sterile. And they had this little baby gurney where they have to like, they had to strap her down. It was the appointment that I was like, okay, this is the one where I'm going to lose it in here. And then you just saw all of these other babies getting various genetic testing for different reasons and things like that. And it was a lot. It was a lot. Of course, I empathize with that feeling of seeing it and opening the my chart and being like, okay. Because as soon as I got it, I was like scroll, and then there's all these words, like words you don't understand, and you're like, what does this mean? Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. And thinking about like being as prepared as you can, what are some things that you've done after Logan's experience, of course, to prepare for your cleft journey with your other 2 children? What are some like practical things that you've done?
I save everything. Things that we have used even before we were going to have a second child. Any surgery related stuff I would save. Cleft bottles I would save, just because in the back of my mind I was like, there might be a chance. I just saved a lot of stuff, which has always been really helpful for each child because I'm like, I already have it, or I already know, or that has been really helpful. And I think I don't know, we just go with the flow. I think the biggest thing that like, yes, we're going through this like cleft journey, but like aside from that, like motherhood in itself and learning to raise children is so hard in itself. And you don't know what you're doing. You're just winging it no matter what. And so walking through Cleft journeys is all that we know. Like, I don't know what it's like to a child. So we just wing it. Honestly, we know what's ahead of us. And I think the biggest and best part of motherhood or having subsequent kids is just like each time your expectations are lowered a little bit. This could go wrong, or this could go wrong, or this could be hard. And just every time it's just things get easier in the sense that like I've become more flexible with each child. Things very planned, very executed, organized. Like I would have when I was pregnant with Logan, I had 6 or 8 different like research articles about clefts printed because I was like reading through all these studies because that's just my personality. But like kid, it's like it'll be okay. Like life goes on and it will be okay and we'll do it together, and making the best of it is really has just been, I don't know. We really tried to make it fun and open, and we just talk about it really openly and are really honest and are really like there's nothing to hide. And I want our kids to feel empowered in their own journeys and know what to expect and know what's going to be hard, because there will be a day where David and I have reached our capacity as parents to really understand like what our kids are going through. Like we will do whatever, whenever, however, and we will be there no matter what. But there's going to be a point where someone's going to rob their joy, or someone's going to make them feel a certain way, or someone's going to do something or say something, and that may build, but there's going to be a point where mom and dad just don't understand. We're going to try our hardest, but there will be a point where it's just, you don't get it, mom and dad. But I'm so glad that they have siblings that do.
Yeah. And an uncle. Uncles. You're like, talk to your uncle.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a huge part. And then outside of that, like what we have strived for as a family is to build this community. Like we have been lucky enough to meet like at least 10 different cleft affected families that we've met through Instagram in person and hang out and have dinners and spend time with each other, because I want my kids to meet other kids with clefts in person and play toys and realize like they are not alone, you know? Like my brother grew up his whole life never meeting another person with a cleft until my son was born, you know? And it doesn't be that way because it's not that way. We go to restaurants or we drive or we go to Disneyland and we see other people with clefts all the time. Like our kids are for sure not the only others out there. And so just really, it has been super important for us to be in physical space with other families that have children with clefts, so they never feel like, oh, something's wrong with me, because there is absolutely nothing wrong with any of our kids or any of the kids in the cleft world. It is just a part of them. It's a big part of them, but it's not what defines them. And I think like live in isolation, you really feel that way, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. I think also like I find that like a lot of people probably reach out to you because a lot of people reference your Instagram and stuff like that. So in managing your own life with a newborn, I imagine that you do have families and parents that are experiencing this for the first time reach out to you. What do you share with them? What I will say, in my experience, right, and because I have a podcast, people reach out to me as well. But also just I have to like, I've noticed when I first started doing the podcast, I didn't realize, I just said, hey, I'll share my story and I'll have other people share their stories. I didn't realize like how much mental and emotional, what do you call that? Like how much it was going to affect me taking in these stories. Like I didn't even consider that. That wasn't even like a thing. But like sometimes like I'll record back to back or I'll engage online and things like that. And I feel like exhausted at the end of the day. Like I feel emotionally exhausted. And so I can imagine people reach out to you all the time and stuff. And while you're in the midst of your journey, of course, people have questions and stuff like that. How do you manage all of that emotionally just in having 3 kids and just being a point person, I feel like.
I would say at least once. So it comes in waves, I feel. But I would say a couple times a month, I get new Cleft moms that reach out to me for the very first time. And the first thing that I really tell them is I just validate their feelings, because I think so many people around them say, it'll be okay, you'll get through this. People try to be really encouraging, which is great, but it's also just not acknowledging like how hard this is and how hard it is to hear this news and how hard it is to deal with it. I think a lot of people outside of the cleft journey they're really well intended, but they don't get it. What I do get is how hard it is and how sucky it feels and how devastating it is in those beginning stages. And I just say, grieve, cry, be mad, be upset, be frustrated, be disappointed, be scared, be embarrassed, feel all of those things, because you can and you should, and it's normal, and we have all done it. Everybody else can fill your bucket and say, it'll be okay, you can do it. And all of those things are true too, 100%. But that's not, I think, a new cleft mom is feeling in that moment. You're like, finally, I remember first reaching out to a mom, and I wasn't messaging them happy and excited. I was like typing out a message in tears. Like I was bawling because I was devastated and I was desperate for someone that just knew what I was going through or could give me answers. And I didn't even know what I was looking for in that moment, but I was just like, hey, you're like me. And I'm just, you know what I mean? Like just bawling, because that's what I'm looking for, is that connection of, I just need to feel seen. I just acknowledge all of the really bad emotions because they're normal, and we have all been there, and everybody else will tell you all the good, happy, fun things. And I get there eventually, but I just want people to know it's okay. It's okay to feel the millions of different feelings that you feel, because that's normal and it's okay. And you should do all of those things, because if you just stuff it away, you're just for a later date.
Yeah. I also don't have all the right things to say, you know what I mean? Everyone's experience is so different. And so sometimes I think like, do I say, yeah, that happened to me too much? Or do I like me to it like too much for people? Or do I like, am I too positive? So I just always try to I allow people to grieve. And I think that is one of the best approaches. Well, I agree with that. So many people, I think a big thing that people grieve too is the breastfeeding aspect of it, especially if they're the first time mom. Was that something that you experienced? I know with Lane in particular, since her palate was intact, did you attempt, or were you like, forget it?
Yes and no. That has still been emotional for me. I feel like the grieving, the breastfeeding always hits me the hardest every time. That's the biggest thorn that really hurts me.
Really? I wouldn't expect that. Wow. Yeah.
Every time, that has always been like one of the biggest things that is the most devastating to me, just because I have always really wanted that. I've always really wanted to experience that and have that. And I think for someone that has wanted something so badly and I don't get to have that, that has always been really hard. But it has always been like one of my biggest grief points for sure. There's actually a video of as Lane was being born, as she was physically coming out of me. My husband was recording a video and they placed her on my chest. And I remember seeing her cry, and when she cries, her mouth is open. And I remember looking into her mouth because I wanted to see what her cleft palate looked like. And I was like, there's no hole here. I was just like, she just had been placed onto my chest. And I was like, she doesn't have a cleft palate. And I said that 3 times in the video. I was like, she doesn't have, and nobody was listening to me. Like, she's screaming and everybody's trying to like stitch me up.
You're like, oh, yeah.
He does not have a cleft palate. And my husband swears he didn't hear me say it, but you can hear me say it on the. And I was just like, what does this even mean for us? Because I had been mentally preparing for her to have a cleft palate, and in that moment your world explodes because you're like happy and you're excited, and then you're like, what does this even mean? And I remember, okay, like now maybe I get to breastfeed this time. And so I tried a little bit, and I was honestly just really scared. Not to breastfeed, but I was scared that it wouldn't work. I was scared of having the hope of something that I wanted so bad, and then it's still not working. So I've just pushed that away and stuffed that away of maybe we'll try later. Because I've had to grieve like the loss of breastfeeding 3 times that I'm like, I don't want to get excited and then again. So we try sometimes, and she's able, like when she gets it, she makes such good suction, but she doesn't sustain it yet, which is okay. But like I said, that's just like my trauma is just, okay, we'll just not try too hard because I don't want to get too excited just to be disappointed. So I'm hoping that like maybe after her lip repair, we could try some more, because then she should have everything that she needs if it's what she wants. So we'll see. I'm holding out some, but I'm not getting to.
I would encourage you, if she has good suction, like if she can, I would encourage you. I have like about 3 episodes about it. There's one with Micah Clark, and she's actually a NICU feeding specialist. And she talks about this a little bit about keeping, like attempting until there are repairs, and how she's seen it. I also have had someone come on another episode that was able to breastfeed with a cleft palate. And of course, that's not everyone's case. And we know I always caution moms against it, because you just want to make sure that your baby doesn't land themselves in the emergency room or the NICU or anything like that from dehydration and stuff. But she actually didn't start until because I guess his anatomy changed a little bit. And so it was later on down the line. He was a few months. So she was actually able to get it to work. So if that is something that you want to, I would encourage you to keep at it, if it's not going to break your heart, of course. But yeah, no, and thinking about that too, I guess having to deal with being on the cleft journey for the 3rd time, to me, I came into that question and thinking like, oh, you've probably gotten past this point, right? That's why my reaction was like that, because it's, oh, like you've known this, you've seen this, you probably have resolved those feelings within yourself about breastfeeding. But as you can see, it still comes up, and it's such a pain point for so many moms. And yeah, I just want to thank you for your vulnerability there in talking about that, because it is really hard to go through. Before I actually learned about my daughter's cleft palate, I was prepared. If it works, if it doesn't, me thinking that I wasn't even going to have a child with a cleft. So that's why I think it was easier for me to deal with those emotions of not being able to. Although I don't like the idea of me deciding versus not someone telling me, but like the decision being made for me. I feel like it's okay if I decide not to breastfeed, but telling me I can't breastfeed is very different. And so, yeah, no, I empathize with you with that for sure. I think it was really hard when I decided to stop pumping, but I had to for my sanity, as many of us have to stop pumping as well. But that's something that you're doing now, right? You're still pumping for Elaine, and you've pumped for all of your children?
Yep. I feel like pumping is my second job, my 3rd, 4th, 5th job. Yeah, I pumped for both Logan and Leah for 13 months. I'm pumping for Lane now. I think it has just become such second nature to me that it's like, I thank goodness for wearable pumps, because I pump while I do everything. I pump on walks, while I drive. I've pumped while walking through Disneyland. I've pumped everywhere. I've pumped on buses, on airplanes. I don't have any shame about it. I mean,
in a box with a box.
yeah, literally, that's me. And I just don't even care anymore. I am so beyond shame, whatever. Yeah, so I pump everywhere. And so I have a really good system in place. So it really now at this point doesn't feel like as much of a burden. But I've also learned, because this is my 3rd time doing it, to lessen my expectations. For Logan, I was pumping every 3 hours, really every 2.5 hours on the dot, every single time, not missing a single session for the first 4 months. And now with Lane, I'm like, okay, I'll do my last pump at 9 p.m. and then maybe once at 5 a.m. And I'm waking up in pain, but I don't care because that's just what I'm choosing to do. Like, I've learned to give myself grace through the process. And
Yeah.
if it's 5 hours before I get to a pump instead of 3, like, that's okay. And I have just learned to give myself a lot of grace for sure in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. What is something that you wish people knew about children with cleft lip and palate?
My children are amazing, as are the rest of the other kids with cleft. I think for Lane in particular, when I found out about her cleft, the hardest part was not for me. It wasn't even for her. The hardest part was like, oh my gosh, what are people going to say? People are going to think, why is she having more kids? Or why do this again? Knowing what they know. And I'm like, I get that. However, my children, have you met them? They are beyond. And I obviously am their mom, but they are such good kids. They're such happy kids. They're curious and they love the world. They love to learn. They love each other. They're kind and happy and smart and fun and fearless and brave. And I could just go on and on. They are amazing kids. And they have taught myself to be more vocal and use my voice and advocate more, to not accept bare minimum. They have taught me so much and they are so full of life. And I would feel the same way about them if they didn't have clefts, but they have taught me really to soak in every moment, and every little thing is a big thing. And so they've just taught me to slow down and just go with the flow and celebrate every little thing. They have just taught me so much that I'm like, okay, their cleft journey is hard. It's hard for us, but for my husband and I, but we'll get through it. We've done it before. We have everything that we need. It's not a burden to us per se. And beyond their clefts, they're amazing people and they'll be amazing in the world one day, and they'll be amazing mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and friends. Like, our kids are so good that the little part of them that is their cleft, like, the good way outweighs the bad. So as long as we feel like it, we're gonna have kids because it's what makes us happy and they're amazing.
That's what I was going to ask you. Are you going to have any more?
I would love to have one more. My husband also wants to have one more. But then
it's done then.
So we'll see. I feel like I'm not 100% complete yet. I would love one more, but we'll see.
Yeah. I feel like, to be honest with you, I haven't even touched on all the things that I want to talk to you about. I wanted to talk about Logan had a VPI surgery, right? Which was really tough. That was like your last tough surgery. And maybe we'll find some time. Maybe we'll find some time to talk specifically about that surgery, because I think a lot of parents have questions about it. And yeah, I would definitely love to have you on again. But what do you think has been the biggest lesson that you've learned along your journey?
That I have a voice and I'm going to use it. Just that's for me and for myself. But I think the biggest lesson is just like how important it is and how much joy leading into other people who have done this before, like how much joy it brings. My favorite thing in the whole world is to meet another Cleft family and to be in the same space with them. And I feel like we just lock eyes, and it's so much like we just sync because there's so much that we don't even have to say. Such an unspoken connection of, here's these years of my life and I'm getting the years of yours, and we just get it. You don't even, and you just get it, you know? And so the friendships that we've made along the way have just been amazing. And just knowing that we're not in this alone. There are some days on my phone that I will get texts from 3, 4, 5 different cleft moms, like just talking, and not even about clefts, but just friends, and we're friends that have so much in common with each other that I think that has created like lifelong bonds because my best friend in the whole world can be my best friend in the whole world, but she doesn't understand like a really big part of my life in the same way
Yeah.
that just looking at you, knowing that you really get a huge part of my life,
Yeah.
in a way that like our family will never understand, our best friends will never understand. There's just a different kind of connection, but just the relief in knowing that we're not alone and we don't have to do this alone. My mom did it alone her whole life because there wasn't a such thing as a cleft community when she was going through this with my brother. And that's just why we have so much joy and we're so unburdened by our cleft journeys in a lot of ways because we're not alone. We're able to share joy and grief with other families that have done this. And just like you said, like watching our kids flourish, like watching Logan on stage.
That was so cute.
Really his best life. Watching Leah just jump into things like head first, literally, because she is my brave girl who will just dive in head first. Just watching the kids just be happy and live their lives, just it will be okay. And they're amazing and they're great and we're not alone and there's a lot to it, but there's so much more good. There's so much more good.
Yeah, it always surprises me how nice people are. Like, people are so nice. You go into any cleft group, and we're like immediately so nice and so kind and no shade. But you go into the autism group,
Yeah.
and they are like fangs out, like they're like attacking each other. You very rarely see that in a cleft group.
No, like not at all. And I would say we've never walked into a surgery without another cleft family buying us coffee or bringing us a meal or sending us outfits or onesies or like we walk into things like not just like with emotional support, but like just with outpouring of things like that are comfort. Like Leah has hand-me-downs from other like cleft affected from different families and like she gets to wear the clothes that another little girl with a cleft wore before her, and there's just something so sweet about that. And so like the cleft community is by far the best community out there for so many reasons, but just you're right, like the love and the support and genuine compassion and like number one cheerleaders. Like literally I posted yesterday about needing to cut dairy out because Lane is really struggling with gas and over 30 people just like reached out and were like, here's the deal. And just so loving, so compassionate, so kind, so encouraging. Just there's nothing quite like the cleft community. And I am just so grateful to be a part of it because it's good. There's so much more, that's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for being on. Kimberly has a newborn, and I can't believe she agreed to this. When Giselle was born, I couldn't agree to anything. I couldn't agree that I was going to take a shower that day. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time with us today. And then also, seriously, I do want to schedule more time to talk about different surgeries and stuff because I think it's so important and so valuable. I think the moms listening are so desperate for that type of information. And it's nice to get it from doctors and stuff. Some people like the science aspect of it, but I think we want to know the real, right? We want to know what to expect with this specific thing. And so I would love to have you back on to talk about those things. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to the Our Forever Smiles, Cleft Mom Diaries, and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen. I hope that you've enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. Talk to you next week.